Well, so I've got another exercise for you. I want you to imagine it's 20 years from now or 25 years from now, and you've been approached by a teenager who's a journalism student at local high school, and they're asking the questions of, where were you the day of? And for me, the question might be, where was I the day that we hit zero, where the emissions from fossil fuel plants hit zero? We no longer generated emissions for creating electricity in our buildings. And my version of the story might go something like this. My son and his family were staying with me, and I heard him rousing around upstairs, and I'm making breakfast for him, and my son comes bouncing down the stairs, and he tells me, "Dad, we've hit zero." And, I thought something was wrong, but, he was really excited because he knew how much this meant to me, and for me to hear it from him, what a thing. And then the follow-up question from this student might be something to the effect of, so from your point of view, what did this look like? And, I might pull out a piece of paper, and in my way, I just tell him, I'm glad you asked, I've made a list. And I'll say something like the following. Look, it was a pain in the butt. It was painful. It was really difficult. It took a long time. There were those of us who were really struggling to try to figure out how to make this happen and make it go, because we saw that it was possible. And it was agonizing to have this knowledge and just feel so powerless for so long. But things started to happen. There were some really intrepid souls who just wouldn't let go of the issue, and they discovered ways in which to reduce energy consumption of all kinds within buildings, and then figured out how to share that with all of us in the industry to make that happen. And they were able to help people who were writing building codes to put in the basic components of it. The building codes are, have to be neutral regarding certain methodologies. But what they could do is they could put in, these are the major components, and if you'll do these elements, then you'll perform a lot better in your buildings. Boss. Now, and the building code, famously in our industry represents minimum standards for fire and life safety, of which this is, clearly an issue. If you think of the entire planet as our building. So that was one part of the story, and the people who were building buildings in that way, the tradesmen, the general contractors, the architects, they all got trained up on how to do all of these basics, and that turned out to be really beneficial, because to get from the basics to the high performance was a much smaller jump for them. Now, it wasn't all the codes across the country, but it was enough, and there was enough of an ability to put that frame in it. So that's one path. Innovations in the way that people occupied and used buildings and worked with each other. There was a group of tenants who heard that this was a really cool thing to do and could substantially improve. They could make a contribution to this problem, but they also found out that there was, a lot of other benefits to be had in the building. It would be quieter when it was done. The air quality would be better. The temperatures would be much more even across the building. They wouldn't have to chase thermostats around to try to get the temperatures even across the building. And they got together. It was like 10 tenants got together and approached the building owner. They're all excited, and they said, "Hey, we want to do this." And the building owner, being a building owner, and any of you who've owned a building and run through a project know that once you're done with the project, the last thing in the world you ever want to do is spend more money on your building. But these tenants approached him and said, "We want to do that." And he turns out his pockets and said, "I would love to. Where are we going to get the money?" And they said, "Look, we're happy with this location where we are. We're pretty happy with the building. We'd like this improvement. We're pretty happy with the building. It's kind of a cool building. And we're pretty happy with you. What do you need? And he dug into it and came back with a number, and they said, well, why don't we just renegotiate our leases? And we can, sign 10-year contracts, renew our leases for 10 years, and that can unlock a little capital for you to do this. He agreed, and they transformed the building. There's a building in Boston that's one of the tallest buildings tallest passive house buildings in the world. Opened up in the early 20s. There was a high-rise dormitory that opened that was using 20% of the energy, and it was built for the same cost. The high-rise, they were built for the same cost, And in the case of the building in Boston, the tenants just snapped it up, even in a market that wasn't performing, because it just felt better. It just rolled better. So we started seeing innovations like that. We started seeing the marketplace get turned on to this and make things happen. So that will be part of the story I tell this young person. And I'll tell them one other story about two other stories. One is about how innovations in how we use buildings as batteries. I'll tell the story about how I was talking to a gentleman who's an attorney in Texas who specializes in insurance litigation. And I was talking to him about insurance issues. And he just told me a side story because he knew I was working on this. That was kind of the reason I was making this call with him. And he tells me this side story about how power in Texas is free from 9 in the evening till 6 in the morning because the West Texas winds blow across the turbines that they've got out there, and they're just spinning. And if nobody's consuming the electricity, then it's not going anywhere, right? So the power provider turned to the high-rise guys and said, hey, why don't you make your chilled water for your air conditioning tonight, and you'll use it tomorrow afternoon. You'll get it for free, so that'll save you on a power bill, but it also means tomorrow afternoon, I don't have to provide power for you, and so everybody else, I can focus on everybody else. You just made a building into a battery. These are the kinds of innovations that just started rolling out. And then there were people who, they really wanted to help and they felt powerless and they had an extra $1 million. And they didn't know what to do with this $1 million. And so I only have $1 million. What am I supposed to do with it? And somehow, some way, they got the idea to purchase education for 300 architects, because for $1 million, you can certify 300 architects in these high performance standards. And those 300 architects, maybe they will only do one project to these higher standards. That's 300 projects. But an architect with 10 years in his career, 20 years in his career, you add all that up, you might get 40,000 buildings that are improved because those architects know how to do that. And then the guy will go out and he'll spend another $1 million to get the tradesmen all trained up. And so now the general contractors have a big pool of people they can pull from to make it happen. And between the trained tradespeople and the trained architects, that's 90,000 buildings, up to 90,000 buildings. And these guys started socializing this and having competitions with their friends. And they unlocked the knowledge and the know-how among dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of locations. And suddenly, pretty soon, it became the norm to just build buildings that used 30% of the energy, 40% of the energy, 50% of the energy, just half of the energy that they used in 2020 or 2025. And eventually, the building consumption curve went down low enough that the power production guys could make up the difference in renewables. and they could shut down their power plants. That's how I see it. I'm glad you asked. I might tell this young student. And I might say, hey, listen, we got to go. We're taking the kids. We're taking the kids down to the aquarium. And then we're going to go out on one of these newfangled sailboats that generates power with turbines. And we're going to go see some whales. And then I'll tell this youngster, you really ought to go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium someday. It'll change your life. I really appreciate you coming with me on this whole journey. I hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. Cheers.